So many problems, and nobody seems to offer up any solutions. Welcome to the automotive world of 2026 and beyond, because none of the trends currently in place show any signs of slowing down or reversing in the foreseeable future. It's crazy out there. So we go on and on about all of the trends, the negative stuff that's happening in the world of vehicles today. The overcomplication, the tech for the sake of tech, the fragility of these things, the disposable nature of cars, and the fact that the manufacturers are going out of their way to make sure that none of us have access to repairing anything that they build. And then there's the cost of these things. Prices of cars, trucks, parts, consumables, all off the chain. And they're not going to get any cheaper anytime soon. So lots of doom, lots of craziness. What is a young person who's wanting to get involved in this world today, actually make their living as a mechanic or a technician, whatever you want to call themselves, what are they supposed to do? Because they don't have the same clear path forward that we had back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, when, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a mechanic. I'm going to work on cars, trucks. Yeah, I'm going to go work in a dealership. I'm going to go work in a nice shop. I'm going to open my own shop. We had a pretty clear path, and today you guys don't. So in the name of offering some solutions, or at least get the conversation started, I came up with a few talking points, not comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination, but just a way to get this conversation started. Because somebody's got to start this conversation. Nobody seems to be talking about what can we do going forward. So I came up with these 3 talking points. And well, I have to change the scene now because the YouTube algorithm favors videos that have multiple scene changes throughout them. So I'll go to a different location now. Okay, perspective and advice from somebody who has 50 years of hands-on experience in this industry. So the first thing on my list, forget formal jobs. Those days are over. That ship has sailed. The idea of becoming a general mechanic today is nearly impossible. So perspective, if you go back to the 1970s when I was coming up, at that time to be a general mechanic, it meant that you were going to work on anything and everything. Yeah, you do tune-up, you do a brake job, change belts and hoses, rebuild a carburetor, these were all normal things. But you would also rebuild transmissions, you would rebuild differentials, you would weld patches onto rotted frame rails, you'd do exhaust systems. If a car had a dent, you'd knock the dent out. You could paint the damn thing too. If you had to throw seat covers on it, you would do that as well. If you were a general mechanic, it meant that you worked on everything. And this was possible back then because the scope of what we were working on was much narrower than it is today. You had your domestics, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, AMC, and you had some imports, Volkswagens, which at the time wasn't even an import. There were so many of them around, it was just another car on the road. But you had the Nissans and the Toyotas and the Hondas, and they were starting to trickle in. And most of them were still relatively new and still under the care of like the dealership umbrella. So we didn't work on that many of them, but it was a pretty narrow scope. The machinery was much simpler. The technology was much simpler. They had trade schools back then. People would go to places to learn how to be a mechanic. You never learned how to be a mechanic there. You learned how to be a mechanic actually in a shop working on stuff. The tech was simple. It was an analog business. It was so simple. You have to picture the auto parts store scene from back then. The vast majority of auto parts stores were just mom and pop operations that were in storefronts. And these things were small enough, 2-3 people working them, and like I said, just in the space of a storefront, that literally nearly everything you'd need, every situation you'd come across, every job that would come through your door, you'd be able to handle through what could be supplied by a mom and pop storefront operation. It was that confined. It was that simple. And now over the last 50 years, it's just, forget about it. It takes giant operations with big warehouses and to do the same thing, to accomplish that same scope. And the vehicles have become so complicated that you can no longer just do a simple power glide rebuild or a 727 or a C4, any of the stuff that used to come through the door. Now back then you had transmission shops, you had radiator shops, you had body shops, and you would use those services when you were busy because those jobs would tend to take up time, so and take up a lot of space. When you were just going about your normal business, yeah, you would rebuild that transmission. When it was tight, you'd send the transmission out to a training shop. And that generally became the norm come the 1980s, where anytime a transmission would come in, you would send it off to a training shop. It evolved. But the point is, being a general mechanic back then was the thing. If you were a general mechanic and you paid your dues and learned the craft and the skills, you could then go work for a dealership. That was like the brass ring. Yeah, I'm graduating from turning wrenches and, Jim Bob's Auto Repair, and I'm going to go work for Chevrolet. Not like that anymore. So there are a few general mechanics still out there. There's one channel I watch, Just Call Me Eddie. I love this guy. I watch a lot of his videos. He's a young guy and he reminds me so much of myself when I was his age because he's like ready to jump in and tackle everything. But that type of mechanic and that type of situation is over. Going forward, you need to specialize, and that's going to be the second thing I'm going to get to here. You need to specialize in one specific aspect of the vehicle, focus on that, and work for yourself. Dealerships can't find mechanics. Nobody wants this job. There's too much involved in it. There's too much training. There's too much expense as far as tools, equipment, always learning, always new systems, always things just becoming more and more complicated deliberately. They're doing this deliberately. They want to squeeze us out. They don't want anybody fixing anything. So they can't find mechanics. And people who have been working in the dealerships and these larger shops, these chain operations, they're leaving for better ground. They're running off, they're doing HVAC, they're doing trucks, they're doing forklifts and stuff like that. They're taking the basic knowledge that and tools, skills that they started out as a mechanic, and now they take them to other places. It's a brutal business. However you got to do it, you have to be able to strike out on your own. It's not easy, it's not straightforward. And it's nowhere near as simple as it was back when I was a kid. I had my first shop, it was like, yeah, here's a couple $100 for the rent. Oh, you want me to sign a piece of paper? Sure. And the next thing you know, boom, you're in business. That's all it took. Today, the expense, the red tape, the insurance, all of that makes it a nightmare. The people who are going to make it going forward are going to be guerrilla mechanics. And I don't mean necessarily like mobile people or anything like that. I mean people who have a very specialized skill in a very specific area of the car or the vehicle and are able to do that work on their own. So whether it's working out of your garage or working out of a friend's garage or renting a part of a building in an industrial area where you just disappear from, you drop off the radar and just build a good social circle. Once people know that you get stuff done and you do it reasonably and you competently and affordably, they will flock to you. And your mission is to find that avenue for yourself. Not easy. It's a problem that you're going to have to solve on your own based on your own circumstances. But being a mechanic is about problem solving. And this is the first problem you have to solve. What are you going to do? What are you going to specialize in? And where are you going to do it? And then everything else will kind of fall into place. So then we go to, then this ties right in. Oh wait, I have to change the scene to keep the algorithm happy. You'll probably have to sit through a commercial now. Okay, another scene, another topic as we settle into our squeaky chair. Specialize. So this overlaps with the first one. But the key to success in the future, actually it's really always been a key to success, but the real key to success in the future is going to be to pick one specific aspect of the vehicle that you happen to like working on, or that you've got a special affinity or a special talent for, and exploiting that. Become the go-to guy for a specific task. So I obviously can't tell you what that's going to be, but I will give you an example that's really dead nuts, exactly what we're talking about here. So heater cores. Nobody has ever liked doing heater cores. They've always been a freaking nightmare. And so a lot of heater core jobs would get farmed out to radiator shops. And the radiator shops ate them up because this was a high profit job. So there was one guy in my area, this is back in the 1980s, and I don't remember his name, but he worked in one of these radiator shops, and he became very proficient at doing heater cores. You do the same job over and over and over again. You start to know all of the sequences, all of the way things come apart, put back together again. You know that when you're laying in this position that you keep your 5/16 French here and you got your Phillips there, and you know that you need your 10 millimeter to get up into that corner, and you turn your wrist just this way and you get at that bolt. And so the job that would normally take an average mechanic, 3 hours, 4 hours, he knocks out in a half hour. Barely breaks a sweat. So this one guy worked in a radiator shop, became extremely proficient with doing heater cores, and then he just started going to shops in the area and giving them his number. Nothing formal. He didn't start a business. I'm the heater core guy. He would just go to every shop in the area and say, hey, listen, you've been sending your heater cores over to the radiator shop. I can come at night and do them in your own bay. Here's my number. Well, the next thing you know, this guy is booked solid. Every shop in the area, he becomes the go-to guy. Not just for heater cores, but other under-dash things that other people really didn't want to deal with. And it didn't cost him anything to go into this business. He didn't need a shop. He didn't need anything. All he needed was a mobile, a toolbox and the will to go lay in this crazy cramped up position, have antifreeze drip in his eyes, and he was fine with that. He loved it. And what would take an old mechanic a few hours, he'd knock out real quick. He could do 2 or 3 jobs a night. This guy was making bank. He was in demand because it was a common job that nobody wanted to do. It required a specialized mindset. You really had to be crazy to love doing heater cores, but he loved it and he made bank with it. That's just an example of the type of thing you can do. There was another guy that I remember in the area, and this was a great gig. He was networked in with the car dealers, and the car dealers would buy cars at auctions that needed engines. They were smoking, they were knocking, they'd be ticking, whatever. It was very common for the dealers to buy cars that needed engines. So this one guy set up his home garage at his house, and it was just like a 2-car garage, and he set it up just to do engine swaps. That was it. The dealer would buy a car, needed an engine, and it's knocking or whatever. They'd send him the car, they'd send him an engine, and 3 or 4 hours later, boom, quick turnover, because this is all he did. He didn't end up getting involved in diagnosing headlight problems or changing a turn signal switch, or didn't get involved in any of that stuff. His business was quick, in and out. Drop off the car, pull the motor out, drop off the motor, drop the motor in, send it. And because you do it so often, the job that would take a typical and average mechanic a whole day to do, he's going to knock out in a few hours. And he's going to get paid the same as somebody who worked the whole day on it. So you do 2 or 3 engine jobs a day. Let's just say you're charging back then $300 or $400 for the turnaround. You're making serious bank. Those are just examples. Obviously, today's world is a little bit, well, I shouldn't say that. An engine swap gig could actually be pretty good because they make the engines out of like tofu and ramen noodles today. So yeah, an engine swap business where that's all you do. Don't touch any other aspect. There's money to be made there. All right, last thing and another scene. All right, last one, and this ties into the first 2. Fabrication and workarounds. And this is going to be huge. I believe in the future, this is going to be a cornerstone of the world of being a mechanic. So, right now, as it stands, we have an epidemic of mechanically totaled vehicles. You go to any pull apart, any junkyard, and you're going to see row after row of cars and trucks that are visually beautiful. They got pin straight bodies, they got perfect paint, they got perfect interiors, and you look at these things and you say, well, that should be sitting on the front row of a used car dealer. But it's not. It's in the boneyard because some aspect of this vehicle's mechanical infrastructure is beyond the scope of reasonable or affordable repair. And so that's it, done. And it's designed that way. The manufacturers in this latest generation of cars have designed them in such a way that once they reach a certain point, there's like cascading failure, where it's just one thing after another, and it's not affordable to keep these things on the road. Also, they discontinue parts. More and more components that are found on a typical vehicle sold, new, are dealer only. The aftermarket does not support these things for one reason or another. And the manufacturers want to pull these parts out of circulation as quickly as they can legally. So you've got vehicles out there that are 12, 13, 14 years old, and you can no longer get this doohickey, that bracket, this module, and that's it. It's done. It's totaled. Be the person who can hack those systems. Be the person who can fabricate the bits and pieces, and you will make bank going forward. There's no question about it. This is going to be huge. So it doesn't even have to be very elaborate. Just an example of workarounds. Several months ago, I bought a Chrysler minivan. I paid next to nothing for it because it was mechanically totaled. The TIPM was bad and it wasn't operating the headlights. So I looked at that real quick and I was like, oh, fine, no problem. I'll just work around that. So I used a relay to be triggered by the headlight switch and hardwired the relay directly from a 12-volt source directly to the headlights. And now they function like a 1965 car would. No problem. A month or two later, my total investment was like $3. A month or two later, it starts overheating. Same situation. The circuit in the TIPM that triggers the cooling fan. Done. So I went on Amazon, I bought a $75 universal controller, spent an hour wiring it in, and done. She's on the road. That type of thing going forward is going to be huge. Not only the workarounds, but also the hacks, because everything is computerized these days. And to take it the next step, when a computerized circuit or a computerized system goes bad and it can't be hacked for whatever reason, it needs to be replaced by something analog. That requires fabrication. That requires 3D printing, metal or plastic. It requires some thought, some engineering. But these are mechanical devices. They can be retrofit with other systems. When you've got an engine or powertrain that the parts to keep this thing running are no longer supported, the guy who can transplant one that's more common, that's more easily worked with into that body is going to make bank. Because that's the biggest problem the world of cars is going to see over the next several years, the next 20, 30, 40 years. Be the guy who can fabricate. A perfect example, like it's an extreme example, but a perfect example of this is the Rich Rebuilds Tesla, his LS Swap Tesla. Perfect example. Mechanically totaled vehicle, beautiful otherwise, powertrain is done. So gut it, and he drops in a good old-fashioned LS with an analog automatic transmission and a differential, and now you've got a functional, viable car. Again, it's an extreme example, but smaller versions of that can be accomplished by pretty much any competent mechanic with the will to do these things. So learning how to hack, learning how to fabricate, learning how to weld, learning 3D printing, and focusing on that workaround mindset will take you far in the future. And it's already there. This is a system that's already been in place for decades. People building hot rods and race cars from the ground up. Those same things, those same skills, the same techniques that supported the hobby can now support the consumer. And they will have to support the consumer going forward. Definitely not a fully comprehensive video, but I do want to get the conversation started. And I'd want to hear the opinions of other old timers like me who've been around for a while, and maybe you've got some insight, some experiences, some stories that you could share in the comments that our youngins can read and perhaps get some inspiration from. Because the culture is far from dead. I think that there's pretty interesting times ahead, and I think that there are small fortunes to be made for those who have the foresight, the aggression, and the balls to move forward in this brave new world. It's just crazy. It's craziness. I hope you got something out of that. I'll see you tomorrow.